Hello, you're listening to Politics Uncensored with me, Ali Milani.
And me, Zoe Grunewald.
Coming up on the show, we'll be discussing a new pilot scheme that will see some migrants arriving on small boats detained and returned across the channel, while the UK agrees to take an equal number of asylum seekers who haven't attempted the journey and pass security checks. Plus, we'll be diving into the backlash around Channel 4's new Bonnie Blue documentary, with critics accusing the programme of glamorising and normalising extreme pornography. Is this feminism or just capitalism in disguise? We'll be breaking that down, all that and more coming up on this week's Politics Show. Stay with us.
And as always, you can find us at Politics Uncensored UK on social media. All that and more coming up later in the programme.
But first, it's the Week Unwrapped. Britain's Homelessness Minister is facing calls to resign after it was revealed that she raised the rent on one of her properties by £700 a month, just weeks after ending the contract with her previous tenants. Rushanara Ali, Labour MP and Parliamentary Undersecretary for Homelessness and Rough Sleeping, reportedly gave 4 tenants in an East London home 4 months' notice last November before relisting the same property at a significantly higher rent. A spokesperson for Ali said that she complied with all legal requirements, and a source close to her insists the house was only relet after attempts to sell it failed. But critics, including campaigners and senior Tories, are calling it hypocrisy, saying someone in charge of tackling homelessness shouldn't be pushing tenants out for profit. Labour's under pressure, with opposition parties demanding Rushanara Ali's resignation. Is this a misstep or a deeper sign of broken housing politics? Zoe, it's not a great look, is it?
No, it's a really, really bad look. I'll tell you why it's a bad look. So, as we know, the government is putting forward its renters reform bill. And as part of that, one of the things they're trying to do is clamp down on no-fault evictions, but also on bad practices that landlords undertake that put tenants at risk and kind of monopolise on our poor housing market. And one of those is stopping landlords from kicking people out of property, or, as in this case, the tenancy came to an end, the fixed-term tenancy came to an end. That would usually result in either another fixed-term tenancy or a rolling tenancy. The tenants didn't want to go on a rolling tenancy because they knew that Ali intended to sell the property, so therefore they left. So they weren't evicted in the sense...
Can we say Rushanara? Because Ali there'll be some misunderstandings.
Okay, Rushanara. Yes. So they weren't evicted in the sense that they were served with an eviction notice, but because they weren't willing to opt into a rolling tenancy with the the concern that they would be evicted because they were selling the house, they were obviously forced to leave the property. But the Renters Reform Bill is supposed to stop landlords from basically getting tenants out under the guise of selling and then listing the property at an inflated price afterwards. The rules in the Renters Reform Bill as it currently stands is that they would need to be that the property would need to be vacant for at least 6 months. And actually that was amended to be 12 months in the Lords before it could be relisted at a separate price. And in this case, obviously, it wasn't at the 6-month mark, and it definitely wasn't at the 12-month mark. So Rushanara isn't even abiding by the proposed legislation, the government policy of her own government. And as Homelessness Minister, that is pretty severe. There's also the fact that what's essentially happened here is her tenants were made homeless. They were removed from their housing, however you want to pitch it, and then she saw an opportunity for a £700 profit monthly out of this. Again, not a good look for a homelessness minister. And I'm going to say this, I'm going to put this out there. I don't think a landlord should be minister for homelessness in this country. I think if you are a landlord, that should disqualify you from that position entirely. Okay, like ministers might be landlords, MPs might be landlords. We actually know that quite a few of them are. But
a disproportionate rate when you compare it to the general public.
Yeah, but putting a landlord in charge of homelessness policy is fundamentally at odds with the role's purpose. I mean, landlords, by definition, will view housing as an asset, something that they can use to generate income. If you want to tackle homelessness, you need to have a completely different mindset, which is that housing is a right, not a commodity. Homelessness isn't just some random misfortune. It's the result of decades of policy failure, chronic underinvestment, and deregulation of the rental sector. And the deregulation of the rental sector and all these other things obviously are helpful for landlords for making more money. So I think this is a conflict of interest, and I don't think you should have a landlord in charge of homelessness policy. And I'm sorry, she could be a minister for literally anything else, just not homelessness.
So this isn't, by the way, the first time where a reported scandal has hit a Labour minister in their actual brief, because Tulip Siddiqui, who was the anti-corruptions minister, was accused of all sorts in connection with, I think, properties here, but also stuff in Bangladesh, if I'm not mistaken. She claimed that was a coordinated campaign by sort of political opponents from Bangladesh or in Bangladesh, if I'm not mistaken. Jess Athwal as well had some stories around
how poor the conditions of his rental properties were.
What is going on?
Well, I think unfortunately in politics there is a sense often for politicians that the rules don't really apply to them, and I don't, her team maintains she did nothing wrong, nothing illegal, and that is probably true. But just because it's not illegal doesn't mean it is morally right. It doesn't mean it is morally right to have your tenants leave your property one way or another. It might not have been a forcible eviction, but they still had to leave because of decisions they made, and then try and secure a £700 a month profit out of it. Especially when you are overseeing a brief for homelessness. We know that one of the most common routes into homelessness is being evicted from a private tenancy. I just don't think, I think it's a massive oversight of the Labour leadership, to be honest, that she was given that position. They knew she was a landlord.
Do you think she should resign?
Yeah, I think she should resign. I don't think she should have got the position in the first place. I think she should resign. I don't think she will resign. But I fail to see how she can be trusted by renters now. And, the Renters Reform Bill, it's one of the things we've spoken about. It's one of the best parts of what Labour's been doing. So don't undermine it,
We don't have a lot of wins in the chamber.
No, I mean, come on, guys. And, just give her any other job. Any other job. Lou Haig, the Transport Secretary, she was forced to resign because of a spent criminal...
Oh, actually, much less, to be honest.
Yeah, criminal conviction from years and years ago that the leadership were aware of.
Yeah.
It just feels like a bit of hypocrisy.
Yeah, this would be like finding out that Wes Streeting refuses to use the NHS and/or is exclusively using private healthcare. I think that probably would be as bad as this.
Yeah.
Right. Next story: criminal justice system. The criminal justice system came up within days of total collapse, not once but 3 times, and was only saved by last-minute emergency measures. That's according to a scathing new review by Dame Anne Hours, the former prison watchdog, who says the prison system was in crisis for nearly a year between the autumn 2023 and the summer of 2024. With overcrowding at dangerous levels, former ministers say they were pushed for plans to reduce prison numbers, but were blocked by number 10 under Rishi Sunak, who allegedly waited for the next predictable cliff edge before acting. Hours says ex-officials were left angry and frustrated, and suggests Downing Street's refusal to step in wasn't just negligent, it may have been deliberate. Let's talk about this, Zoe, a little bit, because it seems that, first of all, none of us were aware of the crisis within UK prisons, I think, before the election. It was something, certainly, I hadn't been aware of, but it also seems like one of the issues that have been most politicised in the way that the crisis was handled, because the last government was afraid of looking probably soft on crime and soft on prison spaces, and refused to reduce prison sizes and the number of people going to prison and getting custodial sentences. And as a result, it seems every 6 months or every 4 months we're getting a new story about the prison system at or on the edge of collapse.
Do you know what drives me mad? There's no consequence for failure in British politics. Rishi Sunak literally just saw that overcrowding in prisons was at dangerous levels. They had to be bailed out with emergency measures 3 times. He basically kept it from the public and just went, let's just kick the can down the road because I'm probably going to lose the next election and that'll be the next government's problem. I mean, how is that not...
Or that I'll deal with this problem after the next election. So it's not something that... So, for example, what the problem is so often that decisions are made like this. So, for example, if you're headed into an election... So, for example, the 2026...
But I don't think they ever thought they were going to win.
No?
No, I don't think. No. I think.
Well, but it wouldn't even be whether they're going to think they're going to win. It would have been damage limitations, right? So they would have thought the next government will deal with this.
But they never thought it was going to be Tory. I mean, I think it's more cynical than that. I think, this is gross negligence, and I don't know why we don't have a system in place where politicians are actually accountable for things like this, which is allowing systems to get so dangerous that people die when prisons are overcrowded.
Yeah, I mean, we've had guests on the show, and I think we had a former prison warden on the show who was telling us the immense amount of violence that exists in our prison as a result of overcrowding and underinvestment.
I think this is even more cynical, and I think this is something that is not just specific to the Tories, but we saw it a lot with Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, which is that they just saw being Prime Minister as something they were entitled to do. Yeah. How hard could it be? I'll add it to the list. It's my turn. And then after I've had a bit of a time in 10 Downing Street, I'll go get a nice cushy job with Goldman Sachs or a lovely little tech firm or some kind of very well-funded right-wing speaking think tank. They just see it as something to tick off. And then when they're in government and they realise it's actually not that easy to be Prime Minister, they just think, well, I'll just do 4 years, feather my nest, build my CV. Any of these major problems, they're not for me. I'll kick them to the next government. As long as I'm okay, as long as I've secured my next job and paycheck, it's fine. I think... you see it in the small boats crisis, you see it in Brexit. I just think it is despicable how negligent, deliberately, willfully negligent the Tories were when it came to such crucial parts of our infrastructure.
One of the things I think you're right on, and you've kind of touched on there are certain parts of policy and the sort of brief that governments get that it seems like we are never able to have a legitimate, nuanced debate around the actual solutions that will solve the problems that are ahead of us. Policing seems to be one, because every politician of the mainstream parties wants to appear like they're really pro-police, really tough on crime, that sort of stuff. So we can't have a legitimate conversation, for example, around police violence against minority communities, police violence against women, about sentencing, about the way that sexual assaults are investigated. We're never able to have that conversation because people have such visceral reactions to it in the public, and none of the politicians have the basic courage to be able to address it. Even when we have conversations around policing, if you look at the comment section underneath the clips that we put out, it's just nonsensical, ideological, knee-jerk reactions, whether you're pro-police or anti-police, and you can't have a nuanced discussion about it. The same, I think, is true of the criminal justice system, and particularly around prisons. Both the Labour Party is too petrified as it is with everything, scared of its own shadow, to talk about the fact that we are sending too many people to prison because you want to seem tough on crime. You don't want to seem soft on crime. You don't want to give your political opponents the opportunity to label you as soft on crime. The Tories naturally just want to stick everybody in prison. So no matter what crime you commit, you should go to prison because we're really tough and we're the toughest guys in the room. And so we're not able to have the conversation that the truth of the matter is, in the UK, we hand out far too many custodial sentences for far too minute and minor sentences. That doesn't mean that you don't think that the crimes are an issue and people committing crimes are an issue, but we should not be sending everyone who commits every crime to prison. And as a result, because politicians have played political games with the criminal justice system, we are now at the point where, as this story said, between the autumn of 2023 and the summer of 2024, we were literally on the cliff edge of a crisis with overcrowding in prisons.
Yeah.
And as a result, by the way, who pays the price for this? It's the prisoners who face violence and inhumane conditions in the prisons, but it's also prison officers. The amount of abuse and violence prison officers face, if people look it up, is unbelievably high.
But this is what I mean. This isn't. They weren't conducting evidence-based policy decisions. They were thinking about how they can present themselves as a prime minister, how they can have their own legacy shored up, how they can get a line on their CV, and how they can move on to their next job, having said, I've been Prime Minister of Great Britain, without actually any care for the underlying issue. And prisons are one of those things that was so easy to neglect. Because quite frankly, the British public do not care about prisoners. They don't have to interact with prisons unless they probably go in or know someone who does. I mean, and prisoners don't vote. So it's so easy to just completely neglect the prison system. And to be fair on our Labour government, they have conducted a number of thoughtful reviews. So we've got the Gork sentencing review. They are looking at a more rehabilitative, restorative approach to justice. But it's too late, and now everyone will remember Labour as the party that released loads of prisoners.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? Though, because you can't actually address the situation with solutions because
It's
the
too
political
hysterical.
cost of that, the hysteria around that political conversation isn't. And you find that in a number of things: policing, criminal justice, and prisons. It's also immigration. You can't talk about immigration because people
In a
are
nuanced
in,
way.
in any sort of nuanced way. I mean, I'm sure we're going to attempt to later on, but you can't debate it in any sort of nuanced way or in any way solutions focused, because people have visceral gut knee-jerk reactions to it, and everybody sits in an ideological camp, and as a result and this is the problem with politicians, if we're ultimately really honest with ourselves, there are no real thought leaders in the House of Commons. There's no one that says, yeah, this is unpopular right now, but I'm going to make the case as to why this is a good thing for the country, and I'm going to make it popular. First of all, no one has the talent to do that in Parliament, really.
Well,
but
it's the,
no
it's
one
the
is even willing
short-term
to do it.
nature of it as well.
Yeah.
You know, political cycles last 5 years. All you're thinking about is the next time you get elected or what you're going to do after the election. It embeds short-term calculated political decision-making.
Right. Talking of short-term calculated decision-making, I don't know about calculated, but some decisions were made. Kemi Badenoch says that Joseph Fritzl... You know, on my bingo card for this week, and if you told me, Ali, write 1,000 headlines about Kemi Badenoch that might be possible in the upcoming week, Joseph Fritzl wouldn't have been on them. I'll be honest with you.
Right, I know you're the comms expert, Ali, but I just think as a general rule, like, don't bring up Joseph Fritzl.
Yeah, okay, I'm not going to charge anyone listening, right? This is pro bono work for all of our wonderful listeners at FUBAR Radio. From one comms expert to my now thousands of clients. Don't talk about Joseph Fritzl is a good idea.
Just don't do
you know
it.
what else? While we're here, don't talk about Jimmy Savile. It's not necessary, is it?
No, we've agreed on that.
Epstein is a different story. Right, let's finish the sentence. Kemi Badenoch says the Joseph Fritzl case made her lose faith in God. The Conservative leader told reporters she once considered herself a Christian apologist, but that's another weird. She's such a weird person. But that changed in 2008 after reading about the Austrian sex offender. Sorry, Australians. It's been a strange week of statements from Kemi Badenoch. Week is being generous, who also admitted to snitching on a fellow student during exams, and she said she no longer identifies as Nigerian. Zoe, what the fuck is going on? So, hold on. Okay, let's go through this. Joseph Fritzl made her lose faith in God. She once saw herself as a Christian apologist. Strange thing to call yourself. And she's a snitch, apparently. She snitched on a fellow student during exams, and she said to be honest, every fucking Tory's a snitch, aren't they? It's like a precondition
do you know what?
of being a Tory.
I had her down as not being a snitch.
No,
like,
every Tory's a snitch.
No, but she isn't like... So that like, I think you can actually quite easily sort Tories into snitch or non-snitch. So Rishi Sunak, such a
100%
snitch.
a snitch.
Boris Johnson, not
a snitch. No, you're right. Boris Johnson's not a snitch. Yeah.
Who else?
he can't
Jeremy
afford-
Hunt,
he
total,
can't afford to be
total
snitching.
snitch like
Yeah.
all the way.
Yeah.
Theresa May snitch.
Definitely snitch.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm going? Like,
Theresa May is definitely whore monitor snitch, by the way.
it's like, are you a sort of old-fashioned Tory, or are you like a more neoliberal?
I'm having fun with this.
Tory?
Let's do Labour. Keir Starmer, snitch or no snitch? He's 100% a snitch.
Oh, I don't know if it works with Labour. You think he's a snitch?
Oh, 100%
yeah.
a snitch.
You know who's not a snitch?
Who?
Angela Rayner.
Angela, 100% not a snitch.
Not a snitch.
I'm with you.
You know who's a snitch? Rachel Reeves.
100% a
Yeah.
snitch.
Anyway,
Yeah.
we should get back to the...
Although she did kind of snitch on herself with that Wikipedia stuff in the book, but we'll move on.
Yes, true.
Let's talk about Kemi Badenoch.
Okay, so...
What's wrong with her?
Okay. So, I think the problem with Kemi Badenoch is she spends too much time online, maybe on Reddit. She's reading.
What do the kids call it? They call it when you're like chronically online.
Yeah, she's chronically online. So everything she reads is like kind of pseudo philosophical.
Yeah.
It's very much kind of like what the alt-right is talking about. This stuff about like culture. She's culturally a Christian. She no longer identifies as Nigerian. It's actually a lot of identity politics for somebody who professes not to give a shit about identity politics.
I think you are spot on. Everything about her says chronically online.
Yeah.
Someone who spends way too much time on the social media
on
feed.
the Jordan Peterson subreddit.
Yeah,
That is where she is. And I just think, stop saying random shit and start actually coming up with policies.
Yeah.
Because don't you want to be Prime Minister? Like, nobody cares about your views on
Joseph Fritzl.
Fritzl.
I just also wonder. So you come in work on Monday morning, right? And she has a whole team around her, and they're like, "Kemi, what do you want to talk about this week?" How does Joseph Fritzl come up?
No.
And Also, by the way, the term Christian apologist is a very weird term. I've never ever heard anyone call themselves. I've never heard anyone call themselves a Christian apologist.
No, I think unfortunately we don't have enough time to.
Am I a Muslim apologist?
To get into. Don't start all that. Not again. Not after last week. Look, we'll have to come back to this. Maybe we'll have to do a whole show on all the bizarre things she said.
But I have so much more to say. The Nigerian bit, Zoe.
I know.
And the snitching bit.
No, unfortunately we've run out of time. We've just been slugging her off. So, okay, coming up, we'll be speaking to Chloe Dobbs, freelance political commentator, all about the new immigration deal that you might have blinked and missed this week between UK and France. That's next on Politics Uncensored.
Welcome back. You're listening to Politics Uncensored with me, Ali Milani.
And me, Zoe Grunewald. Now, a major new immigration deal between the UK and France has come into force this week, but ministers are keeping rather tight-lipped about the numbers involved. Under the pilot scheme, some migrants arriving in the UK on small boats will be detained and sent back to France. And in return, the UK will accept an equal number of asylum seekers who haven't attempted to cross and can pass security checks. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper said the scheme is part of grown-up diplomacy strategy, but critics say it's too small to have any real impact. With crossings up nearly 50% on this time last year, will a one-in, one-out approach really deter desperate people risking their lives at sea? Or is this all just political optics dressed up as policy? Well, joining us now to speak about this topic is Chloe Dobbs, political commentator. Chloe, thank you for joining us. Let's just get your take on this policy. Do you think it's actually going to have any meaningful impact on the number of people coming across the channel?
I think probably no, but there is a small chance that it will work. And I say that because with the Rwanda plan, you had both in the Labour and the Conservative Party, you had a lot of mixed views on this deal, whether it would be a meaningful deterrent. I thought that it was going to do absolutely nothing because the numbers that it was going to send away were predicted to be very small. But then when I was actually in Calais before the general election last year and I was speaking to migrants, they didn't actually seem to know the numbers that were actually being planned to send back to Rwanda, and they were genuinely worried about it, and they were waiting there, and you can see that reflected in the figures for May, June time last year. They were waiting in Calais saying, we're waiting until Keir Starmer gets into power and make sure he gets in because we're genuinely worried about being sent to Rwanda. So it's an interesting deal. I think it's unlikely to work. And I think that the fact that we're already seeing a lot of hiccups when it's only just come into play, a lot of questions about, well, what's going to happen with human rights claims? Is it just going to be a constant court battle to try and get any person sent across? I mean, we saw even when they tried to put migrants on the Bibi Stockholm barge, you had the lawyers straight away coming in saying, oh, this person can't go on the barge because they've got a fear of water and all sorts. I think it could be quite messy and quite difficult to send many people back to France. But I'm up for experimenting. But I think that what this Labour government's been very poor at on this topic and generally in most areas is managing expectations. I think they've really talked up this deal as if it might be the silver bullet that smashes the gangs and sorts out the problem. And they're very likely to overpromise and underdeliver on that, I think.
Chloe, what in your mind would be a good policy to stop the way that some migrants are using boats to come across?
So I think that there are various things that you can do. You will have plenty of people that say the answer is to leave the ECHR so you don't have all these battles with human rights claims, but also to say tow the boats back to France. There's a lot of discussion as to, from a legal perspective, exactly whether that is viable or not. You have some people saying in maritime law, we absolutely have the right to do this, and other people saying, no, that is not possible. But even if we can't tow the boats back to France, I think there are plenty of other things that you can do. So, for example, you can have a policy that, and you would probably have to leave the ECHR to do this, where you say, if you turn up here on a boat, you will not be granted asylum. You will only be granted asylum if you come here via a legal route. You can also do things like, for example, reduce some of the perks that they receive. There's been a lot of outcry lately where Brits really do feel like they're back of the queue when they see that migrants are getting things that they could only dream of.
Like what?
But I think that the issue is often oversimplified in that
Chloe,
you will have people saying, oh,
Chloe, what are migrants
the only
getting
reason why people
Brits
are coming
can only
across the channel is because they want a fancy 4-5-star hotel. That's absolutely not the case. It's very complicated. I've seen that on the ground, talking to migrants in Calais and other places along their journey towards Europe. And there are a variety of different reasons why they come here.
Chloe, what are migrants getting that Brits can only dream of?
So, I mean, for example, one of the stories that we have had this week is that nearly 1 million migrants have got these NHS free passes. Now, that doesn't just give them access to the same healthcare as the rest of us. It gives them access to this scheme, which is available to people on very low incomes, where they will have extra perks. So, for example, they can get contact lenses paid for. I would say that contact lenses are not an absolute essential. I pay for contact lenses, but that's a luxury. I could just wear glasses if I want to. They get the transport to and from paid
but that's
for.
That's not something the Brits don't have access to.
50 quid a week
That's not something
cards
the
for them
Brits
to
don't have
spend money
access
on.
to.
If they want to have things like trips to the cinema, trips to bouncy castles, trip to the theatre, and all of these things, that they should at the very least pay for that and budget for that with this 50 quid Aspen card that they've got, if that's something that they want to do. And I think there are a lot of families. I mean, if you look at, for example, the
Chloe,
cost of going to
can
somewhere
you
like
just
the
stay on
cinema
topic
these
for a
days, if you've got a
second?
family with
Chloe?
several children, I
Chloe?
think a lot of families that are struggling with the cost of living crisis
Chloe?
struggle to take their kids out
Chloe?
on days out and whatnot. And then
Chloe?
they're seeing that migrants are being given that. And that's
Am I speaking English?
creating, very
Chloe?
sadly, a lot of resentment and frustration. And I think...
Chloe, can I ask you? I asked you about what they get that Brits don't get. You spoke about NHS access cards. Every British citizen in this country has access to the NHS, and these same cards, by your own admission, Brits on low incomes also get. As the migrants, the refugees that we're talking about are also on low income, because the level of support, state support that they would get is the same level as people on low income. So I'll ask you again, try and stay on topic for me. What's one thing that these migrants get that British citizens do not get?
So I think there are many British citizens who would love the opportunity to be able to stay in a hotel without having to work, having buffets full of food given to them 3 meals a day, being given cards with 50 quid to spend on. There are plenty of Brits who set their alarm every single morning, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, and they go out and work day in, day out to put a roof over their head. Often a roof over their head that is nowhere near as nice as what these migrants are getting. There are very few people in Britain who have the
migrants allowed to work?
to live in a hotel whilst not working, with
Chloe, are
food
these
fed to them
migrants
3
allowed to
meals a
work?
day, 50 quid put on a card for them.
Chloe, are these migrants allowed to
There are
work?
plenty of examples.
Are refugees who are having their asylum applications under assessment, are they allowed to work?
No, they're not until their asylum application is processed, right? We've seen people doing things like Deliveroo. I think
if they can't work, how do they pay for somewhere to live and eat?
For having migrants, if they're going to come here, pay for their stay in a hotel in some way. So that might be...
How would they do that if they're not allowed to work?
You're not free to do whatever work you want, but you have to do some sort of community service work or some kind of jobs where it's kind of restricted what they could get up to. I have my concerns about the delivery riders, for example, because you have got people turning up. If you're a woman and you order late at night some food and you've got some man coming to your door who hasn't been vetted, you don't know who they are, to hand you your food and there's nobody else around, I think that could pose a danger. Some people have spoken about a system that's somewhat like a student loan kind of system, where you say to migrants, okay, you can come here and you can stay in this hotel whilst your asylum claim is processed, but then you're going to have a loan that has to be paid once you're then able to work.
The problem here, Chloe, is that you started the conversation by saying that they have privileges that British citizens don't have access to. I've asked you twice now. You've not been able to name a single thing that migrants have access to that British citizens don't have access to. You spoke about hotels and foods that they get in those hotels. That's a direct result of the fact that we don't allow migrants to work, and you can't have them living on the streets and starving while their asylum applications are rightly being assessed. For some reason, you brought up going to the cinemas and going to bouncy castles. I have no idea what that has to do with anything. But the reality is that as long as people who are refugees and asylum seekers are seeking refuge and asylum in this country, there has to be a level of support given to them, or they have to be given the right to work.
So I'd come back with that with a few things. So first of all, I would say I have answered your question in that I have given you examples of things that migrants get that a lot of Brits would struggle to afford. Okay, you can say, oh, migrants can stay in hotels, and then you can say, oh, a Brit could stay in a hotel if they pay for it, right? I'm not suggesting that these migrants have access to things that no other Brit could possibly access.
Well, that's what you said at first. So now you've changed that.
Who are really struggling.
Well, you've changed it now, but let's go with your second claim.
The kind of lifestyle and the things that are being given to these migrants. Now, on this point of, surely we need to give them accommodation and we need to, or give them the right to work. I don't want to oversimplify this because I think it is often oversimplified. So you have a few different options. So first of all, if you were to say, okay, if you come to this country, you can claim asylum, but you won't be given any sort of roof over your head whilst you are claiming asylum. That, on the one hand, deters people from coming. But on the other hand, it means that people will still come. It won't completely stop people coming. And you will end up with a lot of people on the streets, potentially making citizens feel more unsafe if they're just living on the street in tents and creating a mess. So you see this in Italy. I saw this in Milan. You have a lot of migrants will come to Italy and they've got to wait about 6 months for their asylum claim to be processed. And they can either sleep on the streets for those 6 months, or they can try and sneak their way into somewhere like France by climbing through the Alps. As a consequence of that policy of not giving people accommodation, a lot of people move on and choose not to claim asylum in Italy. But it does mean that, for example, the big train station in Milan, after dark, it becomes a very dangerous place. All of these homeless people are there, often getting up to no good and getting up to criminality to try and make some money to survive on, and it's very, very difficult. So I think if anyone does turn up, I do think they need to be given some sort of roof over their head. But I think that it should be in a detention center or something, or they're processed offshore. I don't think that they should be allowed, if they're in a hotel, I don't think they should be allowed to leave and roam the streets before their claim is processed.
So you want to place asylum seekers on, in essence, house arrest? I think it is a big slap in the face to the taxpayer if they are given somewhere really nice to stay.
Right, I want to just get back to the diplomacy here between UK and France, because for me, what is significant about this deal is it is a new era of international cooperation when it comes to dealing with this issue. Before, we had a pretty isolationist set of governments who didn't really want to look like they were doing deals with their European neighbours. Perhaps this deal is actually, when you look at the numbers and you look at the detail, quite small and might not have a huge impact. But do you think it's significant that Keir Starmer is looking at this problem as one that requires his international neighbours to take note as well? I mean, I'm basically asking you, do you think this problem can really just be solved by the UK alone? Or is it just a fact that we do need to get France and we do need to get Europe to help us?
I think it could be either. So if you took a really hardline approach and said, oh, we're just gonna tow boats back to France. As I said, there's a lot of discussion as to whether that is legal or not. Then maybe the UK could do it somewhat alone. But I think in reality, most politicians, at least the Labour Party, are going to struggle to have the political will to do something like that. And talking with the French and negotiating with the French and other European neighbours is going to be important. But I think it's important that in those negotiations that we are harsh on the French and we don't allow them to fool us. You've got to realise that one of the big problems with this illegal migration problem is that the country that migrants are leaving from, there's very little incentive for those countries to stop migrants from leaving, because they'd rather those migrants be someone else's problem. They'd rather another country's taxpayer have to pay for it, right? I mean, I saw this for example, in Lebanon. You have boats leaving there making a far more dangerous journey than crossing the English Channel, absolutely horrifying numbers of people dying, going all the way to Italy from Lebanon in some tin can boat. And we were talking with the Coast Guards there, and they said, we will send out the Coast Guards to stop a boat leaving if it's flat seas and it's calm conditions. But if it's rough conditions, We just won't bother. We're not going to put our guys at risk to save some people who were stupid enough to get on a boat in bad conditions. We'll let them, we'll let them go, and we'll let them be someone else's problem. And if they die, they die, right? And so that's very, very difficult. So I think we need to be harsh on the French. And I think that we've given the French a lot of money. And they haven't really been doing very much with it. I mean, over the past couple of years, we've seen the percentage of boat crossings that they've been stopping actually going down. We've had a lot of journalists going out there recently exposing the French police not really doing a whole lot. And speaking to people who one of my friends who I did this Channel 4 documentary of, who spent a lot of time working in camps in Calais, she was very clear to me that the police they're all taking bribes from the smuggling gangs to turn a blind eye to this. That needs to be addressed. So I think we need to, if we say to the French, we're going to give you some money to stop these boats, we need to actually properly hold them accountable to make sure that is done. I think it's always going to be a difficult task, even if they do their job, because I mean, there are so many different beaches, so many parts of the coastline. Also, these smuggling gangs are also they're very adaptable. They're very smart. Ask you, they're very savvy. They used to focus on lorries, and there was more of a clampdown on that. They moved to boats. They've as rules have become stricter, what they'll do is they'll charge a higher price and offer, say, a more
Chloe, can I ask you a quick
more
question
unique service, because they've got to dodge more rules.
Before we run out of time, Chloe, if it's not via boats, which I think both you and I are agreed on, that the route to the country via boats is not a good one, probably for different reasons. How should migrants, asylum seekers and refugees specifically, apply for asylum to the UK?
Yeah, so I think that we should have some legal routes. There will be, amongst the people that want to stop illegal migration, you will have some people who say we should take absolutely nobody whatsoever, at least for now. And then you have other people who say we should take refugees, but in a limited number.
What do you say?
I think that we should take some, but it needs to be via a legal route. And what I would say is that when I've visited countries where people are very poor and are in very unsafe conditions, is that the people who most desperately need to get to us and most desperately need our help are the women and the children. But the people coming across for various reasons on those boats are mostly men. If we had legal routes where we prioritize women and children, we can't take everybody from the world, right? There are so many people in poverty and in states of war across the world. We should take the people who are most in need. Why don't we have a system where we take a limited number and we prioritize the people who most desperately need us? And that is mostly women and children. And then that means there are fewer concerns. You will be aware there are various concerns about the intentions and the culture that men from certain countries bring with them. I'm definitely not tarnishing everybody with the same brush there, but we've seen various
Chloe, but we are running out of
proportionality figures coming out about sexual assaults and whatnot.
You
wouldn't
so
have
much
as much concern
Chloe,
about that.
I appreciate that. Unfortunately, we are running out of
time.
time, so we are going to have to go to the break. Thank you very much. That was Chloe Dobbs, political commentator. Appreciate you coming on to speak about that with us.
You're listening to Politics Uncensored with me, Ali Milani.
And me, Zoe Grunewald.
Zoe, I've not been ignored like that in a long time.
I feel tired now.
It impacted my self-confidence, to be honest. I had someone just ignore my existence like that in a long
I didn't know we could do that. I didn't know we could just ignore you. I would have done it more often.
Yeah, you would have done whole shows of us just talking in parallel. Right, something to cheer us up. A new Channel 4 documentary about adult content creator Bonnie Blue is causing a storm, with critics accusing it of glamorising and normalising extreme pornography. Blue built a lucrative career by filming herself having sex with 18-year-old men, often at universities, including turning up to a freshers' event with a sign reading, "Bonk me and let me film it."
Can we just clip Ali saying that?
Yeah,
just to have it in there.
Let me look at camera. Bonk me and let me film it. But while the model flips the typical power dynamic, with Blue making millions while the men appear for free, it's raised serious questions about consent, exploitation, and what counts as empowerment in the age of OnlyFans. Is this sexual liberation? Is it capitalism in disguise? Is it feminism? Zoe, what is it?
So, I watched the documentary.
Did you? Right.
Yes.
It's out now on Channel 4?
On Channel 4.
Right,
and there was a lot of sex in it. My God. I kind of thought, actually, they wouldn't show any of the bonking, but they did.
There's lots of bonking.
There is bonking in there. And there was a bit of a furore about it being the same week that the online safety regs kicked in about under 18s being able to access certain content.
Yeah.
you could just click, yes, I am over 18 and watch the Bonnie Blue documentary, which did have quite a lot of porn in it. So, so maybe we can discuss that as well. But my view is that she is a shitposter. She's realised that the way to stand out on OnlyFans and the way to stand out in the crowded porn market, the content creation market, is to be different, right? And one way to be different and to get clicks and be shared is to be as provocative as possible. A bit like Andrew Tate, you know? And she has realised that one of the most provocative things you can do to get everybody talking about you is to essentially, I think, do these huge stunts like sleeping with 1,000 men in one day, but also to speak language that is pretty kind of, I guess, misogynistic, talking about women not satisfying their men and how she would sleep with married men and she's happy to sleep with barely legal men. You know, all of it is very, very provocative, insulting and offensive to a lot of people. But I don't really believe she believes those things. No. And maybe that is me being, trying to be too defensive of her, because I feel like she's got a lot of hate, and whenever you see a woman getting attacked like that, it does obviously put you back up. I really don't like the things she says, but I feel like she's kind of having us all on.
Yeah, she is.
And if you don't like it, probably the best thing to do is not engage with her at all. I find elements of pornography, I struggle, because on the one hand I really want to. I think that content creation via platforms like OnlyFans sounds to me a lot less exploitative than the porn industry.
Yeah.
Pornography exists. I think if it exists and it's going to exist, the best thing we can do is try and make it as kind of ethical, in inverted commas, as possible. Clearly, the stuff she's putting out there is not great when it comes to women's rights, when it comes to perceptions about healthy relationships, when it comes to perceptions about what women should do and what sex should be like for women. But I'm glad at least she's doing it herself. No one's making her do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Look, I actually think... So I think Bonnie Blue is the Katie Hopkins of the OnlyFans world. And I think you're absolutely right. She is... Essentially, her business model is to escalate continuously and to say more and more provocative things, like you've said, for attention and for money. And so when I watch interviews that she has done on various podcasts and on various news channels, I haven't seen this documentary. It seems to me that none of her answers are honest, that she's lying throughout and she's having everybody on, because her answers, I don't believe, are a real reaction to the questions she's being asked. It's a thought process in her head of how can I escalate and equal views and equal money. And the problem, I think, is that she is essentially, this is a sort of hyper-capitalistic. She doesn't care what impact she has on society, what impact she has on young people, what impact she has on men and women in our society, as long as she gets paid. And I think it is a little bit of an indication of a newer generation who no longer really see their role in society as well as their roles as individuals. So we all have roles as individuals to look after ourselves, to make enough money to live, to provide for our families. That's our individual responsibilities. In my view, we also have responsibilities to society as a whole in our actions. But there seems to be a drive that society doesn't really exist, to quote Margaret Thatcher. And she is taking that Katie Hopkins extreme hyper-capitalist sort of view of, I don't care what impact I have on society. I don't care what impact I have on women. I don't care what I have to say and how far I have to escalate. If I get paid, it's fine by me.
Yeah. And watching the documentary, they interviewed other content creators, OnlyFans content creators. I think all of them were making pornography, but I could be wrong. But they basically said, this job's so much better than sitting at a desk 9 to 5. It pays so much better. I'm in control of. I've got more autonomy. Yeah. I'm doing something I enjoy.
Yeah.
And in some ways.
But what about the impact it has on society? I'll ask you, right?
I agree with you, but I also do feel. I do sympathise. I think Bonnie Blue herself used to work in the NHS.
Did she? Right.
I don't think she was frontline staff. I think she was maybe admin. But it is this thing of, you're right, when it comes to a hyper-capitalist society, when even jobs that used to pay you a decent wage so you could go home and gave you a certain amount of autonomy and dignity aren't scratching that itch anymore. And maybe that's because of wages stagnation or a failure for jobs to modernise with modern day needs. Or maybe it's because people are spending copious amounts of time online comparing themselves to other incredibly wealthy people and thinking, well, I can't get the lifestyle I want on a nurse's salary, for example. You're right. It feels like the end point of that, where it is, actually, I just want to make as much money as possible for me. And, Bonnie Blue is now £1 million. No, she was making, I think, almost £1 million a month. Or she was planning to.
Yeah.
But for me, at what cost? I almost have a bit of admiration for how much she doesn't give a fuck what people think about her, because I care. It's like you've got £1 million a month, but does it matter if you're worried? At one point she said she was worried that people were going to throw acid on her.
Yeah.
I mean, does £1 million a month make that okay?
But it shouldn't just be the potential risk to you as your safety as an individual.
Yeah.
But what role you have in society.
I
So,
agree
for
with that.
example,
I agree with that.
I would like to think of myself, and you never really know until you're presented with the situation, and I've never been presented with the situation. But there are limits to what I'm willing to do for money, right? And I'm sure the case is true of you. Like, for example, you could pay me all the money in the world. I'm not going to work for an arms factory that's dropping, bombs on children in Gaza or in Ukraine, for example, right? Equally, I'm not going to work in a sector that I think is having serious negative effects societally on women, on young men, on particularly like working class people, for example. And she just doesn't seem to give a shit about that at all. And the really tough part with engaging with her at all, and this is why I compared her with Katie Hopkins, I don't believe a word that comes out of her mouth when she's doing these interviews. So I think it's a waste of time. And so when we talked about this segment today, I did consider putting in our WhatsApp group with producers and stuff to say, should we put out a request to get her on? And ultimately, the reason I didn't put that in the group was I don't think there's any point.
Would make a difference. She'd use it as a opportunity to promote herself.
Yeah. So
and fair play to her, except you're totally right, which is, what about the wider harm?
Yeah.
And I think especially, we know that men are growing up in misogynistic online spaces. Yeah. We know that women and men are falling apart on ideological grounds. I am worried about what this sort of pornography teaches.
And
but it's
and
not
her
just
content,
her.
by the way, can I just say her content it's not just like typical OnlyFans content. Like a lot of it, like we said, is this barely legal stuff, going to universities.
Cheating on your partner.
Cheating on your partner, which is often, and let's not be willfully ignorant, I don't need any stats to prove this, goes after vulnerable people, right? And again, she doesn't care as long as she gets paid. And there's got to be something that says about us as a society and why we give her, so much airspace. And it is quite sad that this seems to be the extremist form of the individualistic capitalist,
and you're right, but it's also a complete condemnation. It's sort of totemic of what is rewarded now in modern day society, which is outrage. Your stuff will get shared more if you're outrageous. You'll earn more if you're outrageous. I mean, we almost feel it a bit as political commentators. To get booked, you've got to say stuff that creates conflict.
Yeah. Like when we get booked on stuff, you do sometimes think, oh, shit, well, I need to say something to come back, right? And she's just taking that to the ultimate extreme. Right, that's it from Politics Uncensored today. Join us next Thursday at 5 p.m. where we unwrap the week's political talking points. You can stay up to date with the show by following at Politics Uncensored UK on social media, where you can find me at Ali Milani UK.
And you can find me at Zoe Grunewald.
If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back and catch up at FUBARradio.com or via the FUBAR Radio app.
Download it from your app store now.
Thanks for listening. See you next week for another episode of Politics Uncensored.